Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Matt here, finally sitting down to do my Q&A/FAQ video. I had announced the fact that I wanted to do this video probably back in the fall. I posted both on my Instagram as well as my community page here on YouTube that I wanted to do this video, and you guys submitted a lot of questions, a lot more than I was expecting, so thank you for that. Some of the questions definitely were asking more or less the same thing, so I may have paraphrased it into a more general format. But if you do have any more questions or you want me to really dive more into a topic, leave any further questions in the comment section below and I'll slowly compile them over time. And I also had an idea. I think it'd be really cool to do the next Q&A video if I end up doing it live, because that way you guys can obviously interact with me and ask questions as the video is going on. So let me know in the comment section if that would be something you're interested in as well, because I'm not going to do it if no one would be interested in actually participating in that. Also, quick disclaimer before we jump straight into the questions here. Keep in mind, I'm not a coach or an expert or an instructor or anything like that. I'm just another competitor on the firing line that just so happens to have a camera and an internet connection so I can upload these videos. I'm also just giving my opinions right now at this point in time. My opinions can change, and they always do. Things that I had opinions about 1 or 2 years ago could have changed by now, and going forward that's the same case. So just keep that in mind as well. And we're also specifically talking about the shooting discipline that I compete in, which is mainly PRS rimfire. So that's sort of how I'm going to be phrasing a lot of these answers to some of these questions. So let's just dive straight into it here. These are in no particular order, and we have around 30 questions or so. So the first question here is, what are your favorite barricades to shoot from at a match? And generally speaking, I don't get too excited about new barricades these days, because essentially you can approach a lot of barricades in the same way. The only thing that really matters is how far above the ground you're building your position. And that's why I say it's a good idea to practice dry fire or training on something like a ladder, where it gives you all the different varying heights to choose from. That way you can learn to build your shooting positions from different heights, and you can apply that to a lot of different barricades. So essentially the barricades now that I get a little bit more excited about are things you just don't see at the smaller club level matches, like Connex containers and buses and trucks. Shooting in the bus at Texas was a lot of fun, and like through the windows at the Connex container at MKM. I think those type of barricades are a lot more fun, but simply just because I don't see them as often and they're a little bit more interesting. Second question here is, do you ever use free recoil? So free recoil is basically when you let the rifle settle in all pointed at the target and you don't put any shoulder pressure on it, and then you pull the shot off. I know some very good shooters who have told me before that they implement free recoil quite often, but it's not something that I do basically at all. The way I train, I put quite a bit of shoulder pressure into my rifle, and it's just not something that I would try to match, especially since I haven't really practiced with it at all. I've considered maybe implementing it, or at least trying it out to see if it works for me, but currently I don't do that. And this sort of goes into the next question as well, which is, how do I build a solid shooting position on wobbly barricades like upright tires or the hanging chains or ropes? And this is the closest I'll do to free recoil. I'm in the mindset where if it's a really wobbly barricade, I generally like to try and settle my rifle naturally on target and then not influence the barricade as much as possible and pull the shot off. But I'm usually still putting some shoulder pressure into it, but that's the closest I'll ever do to free recoil. Keep in mind, I've not mastered this by any means. Wobbly barricades definitely still kick my butt quite often, so it's still something I'm trying to practice. Next question is pretty funny. Where is Kevin? So Kevin was a very frequent guest on the channel. Back in 2021, I think, is when we shot a lot together. We would shoot both for training as well as matches together quite often. So he was in a lot of my videos, and he was also in a lot of videos that were just fun. Like it wasn't really match related. We were just having fun, making fun videos. And that's because he had a farm he had access to that we practiced at a lot. And it's not like the range where there's a lot of background noise and your audio gets completely destroyed. So we were able to film a lot of videos on that farm. But as you notice, he's not in any of my videos lately, and that's simply because he's taken a step away from shooting currently. He's just starting his own business. I do talk to him intermittently here and there, and he's doing well. He actually did drop by at a match close to his place, just not for score, just to shoot some stages, and we caught up and we had a pretty good time there. Would you ever shoot a match in production/base class? The quick answer to that is not, unless I had a reason to, and I never have. When I first started shooting PRS rimfire in January 2020, I already had my CZ in an ACC. Actually, at that time, the ACC was fairly new. I think it came out at the end of 2019. So I was like one of the first guys on the fire line to have an ACC, especially in the rimfire world. So I thought I was super cool, you know, coming up with the new fancy toy. And then obviously I shot pretty poorly because I didn't know what I was doing, but I shot an open in my first match and I haven't shot production since, and I don't really have any plans to. I think if you're a beginner shooter, there's some merit in staying in production if you really want to compare your scores to other production shooters, because generally speaking, the production class will have more beginner shooters. So I guess there's some merit in that, but honestly, my opinion is it doesn't really matter what class you shoot in, and most shooters, once they get a little bit more into the sport, they'll eventually just bump up into open because they want to try a little bit fancier gear anyway. But there's nothing wrong with staying in production if you want to. What is that muzzle device? Now this is pertaining to the tuner that I've been running on my Vudoo, and ever since I started using that, I got this question so much. I'm sure I'm gonna have to answer it in the future because people who don't watch this video are still gonna ask, but it's the Red Knob tuna can, and I actually have a sticker here. Paul from Red Knob made up these funny little stickers, and he was nice enough to give me a couple. But that's exactly what it is. It's just a tuner that he has dubbed the tuna can. And the reason why I get so many questions about it is because of the way it looks. It is mistaken as a suppressor quite often, but here in Canada we can't have suppressors anyway. So it doesn't have any baffles or anything to change the sound signature of your rifle. It's simply a tuner, and that's what I've been running on the Vudoo. How much time do I spend practicing offhand shooting? So that's unsupported, usually using a sling, and weak side shooting, so support side. For me, it'd be my left eye, shoulder, and hand. Starting with the first one for unsupported sling shooting, I basically never practice it at all, which I probably should because it's definitely a very weak point in my shooting abilities, especially with my heavy competition rifles. And in our monthly club level or PS matches, we're always guaranteed one offhand stage a month, and that's usually my poorest stage for each match. So definitely something I could work on, but honestly, I'm just not prioritizing it right now because my focus is on the larger format matches, and it's very rare to see an offhand unsupported stage at one of these larger format matches. So it's just not something I put priority on, but definitely something you should if that's important to you. And the second part of this, practicing my weak side. I used to practice weak side quite a bit, as well as offhand shooting actually, but they've both fallen off. Now, when it comes to weak side shooting, I'm actually left eye dominant, which helps me quite a lot. I found this out when I took up archery probably like a decade ago, but I remember when I first started, I was trying to use my right eye to aim, and I really couldn't do it. So I really had to train to use my right eye for aiming purposes, which is obviously what I do with rifles now. But that means when I switch to my weak side, my eye is actually naturally dominant on my left side. So getting the sight picture in my scope is a little bit more natural for me. So it's not something I practice very often because same thing, support side, weak side shooting at a match, you might see one stage out of like every 4 matches might have some weak side shooting. And as long as you can safely manipulate your rifle with your weak side, it's not something that I would take too much time practicing because it's not going to give you a lot of points at a match. But again, get to a certain level of proficiency where it's going to be good enough, and then keep your skills sharp enough to hold it there and practice things that you need to. Next question here is, are there any gear or equipment you think is total garbage? I would actually have to say, as long as it's designed for the intended use, which in this case is PRS style matches, there's very little that's actually totally trash on the market, especially when it comes to optics these days. What you can buy for like around $500 to $700 now is quite impressive. As long as it's designed for your intended use, I don't think you can go wrong with most things on the market. Obviously, if you brought like a BDC hunting scope to a PRS match, it's going to be garbage, but simply because it's not designed for it, not necessarily because the scope itself is garbage. Why did you switch from the 457 to the 360? So I started shooting with the CZ 457, and after about a year and a half, I bought the Vudoo 360. I only switched purely from my own interest's sake. There's nothing wrong with the 457. It had an IBI barrel, it was in an ACC, and it was not by any means holding me back. But I just wanted to try something that gave me more options for chassis and triggers, especially chassis, to be honest, because I wanted to try different chassis to see how they felt. But the 457 has a little bit more limited options in that regards. Also, at the time, Timney didn't have the trigger released yet, which a lot of people have upgraded to. Perhaps if they had come out with that earlier, it may have delayed me getting the 360, but I think I was bound to get it eventually. I actually knew about the Vudoo rifles before I bought my 457 in late 2019 because I was following Jonathan Ocab's channel, and I think at the time he just got the Vudoo, or he was just about to get the Vudoo, so I thought that was really cool, but the price point was a little bit hard to swallow, especially since I hadn't shot a match yet, so I ended up going with the 457 at first. What cameras do you use to film your YouTube videos? For the first 2 seasons, I was using a very cheap Canon point-and-shoot camcorder. I actually bought it like on Black Friday, and it was just a way to easily set up a camera. It's literally just turn on and press record, but I've since upgraded to 2 Sony cameras. They're both APS-C size sensors. One is the Alpha 6600, and my secondary sort of B-roll camera is the ZV-E10, I believe it's called, but I'm not really a camera guy, to be honest. I just bought them because they were highly reviewed for video purposes, and they were a little bit on the more entry-level side when it comes to camera equipment anyway. They're still, in my opinion, by no means cheap, but those are currently the 2 cameras I use, and they're both Sony. How long does it take you to edit a video? This is actually a really good question. Obviously, it varies greatly on the style of video. If it's just a straight vlog with limited text overlay and stuff, I could probably cut that in an hour or 2. The really fancy, sort of flashy match recaps, so for example, the Sheepdog Warrior regionals, a video like that where I have to sync up my target cameras to the main video and cut a lot of B-roll with music, those take a couple evenings of solid work, so I would say anywhere from 8 to 12 hours for those. It's actually quicker now because I have a lot of presets for certain effects that I like to use, or not really effects, but certain positions of overlay stuff like text. And before, it would take me probably 15 to 20 hours, I would say, when I didn't have all the presets already plugged in. And yeah, it takes a lot of work, to be honest, but it's also something I enjoy, so it's not like a drag for me to edit these videos. The next couple of questions, I was actually interested in the general consensus, so I did a few Instagram polls. So the first one is, how much magnification do I run? And I'll put up the Instagram poll here on the screen. I was actually really surprised to see how many people voted for 16 plus magnification, because that to me is quite high. And I remember I was checking who voted for what as they were coming in, and a lot of good shooters that I greatly respect were voting for that category. So I don't know if that's something I need to try, but me generally, I'm always within the range of 12 to 16, and I will say probably 95% of the stages I shoot, I'm just at 15 times power. I'm very comfortable shooting there in terms of being able to find my targets quickly, being able to see my entire reticle and still being able to read it well, and seeing enough detail to make corrections with follow-up shots. So I'm almost always around 15 times power. I don't even have the throw levers on my scopes anymore, but I will bump it down if a stage is really a little bit more complicated and I want that bigger field of view, if the targets are really hard to find and mixed in with a confusing background or something like that. But generally speaking, 15 times power, and I might bump it a little bit higher than that if I'm shooting something like a KYL. The next is a classic question, MRAD or MOA. Now, obviously, if you follow the channel, you know that I use MRAD, and that's generally what I would recommend as well. Anecdotally, what I would say is here in Canada, what I notice at the large format matches is there's very, very few MOA users. I would say probably less than 5%. It's rare to see even 1 or 2 MOA shooters at one of the larger matches. However, at the more entry-level beginner, like club-level matches, there's quite a few MOA shooters, and that's generally because there's a lot more new shooters to the sport. And when I started shooting matches in the States, what I noticed right away was there was a much larger group of MOA users. It's still quite small compared to MRAD, but I would say maybe about 10%, if I were to guess, use MOA in the States for these PRS style matches. So it's just interesting. Again, that's all anecdotal from what I've just seen personally. But on my Instagram poll, it was 18 to 82% in favor of MRAD still. But even then, the MOA votes was a lot higher than I thought it would be. But perhaps, obviously, you know, these polls aren't exactly the most accurate thing in the world, but definitely MRAD, and that's what I would recommend for beginners. I find the turrets are cleaner to read. Managing your dope numbers is a little bit more intuitive at least I think so personally, with MRAD. And since the vast majority of shooters use it, it's a little bit easier to communicate your drop data and wind holds. I will also say that I've seen quite a few shooters start with MOA scopes and move to MRAD, but I've never seen it the other way around, where someone starts with MRAD and then goes to MOA. Again, we're talking PRS style shooting here, and that's just my take on it. Next question is single or two-stage trigger. I also did another Instagram poll on this, and it didn't really surprise me. Single stage won out by a little bit, and that's also generally what I would have expected, but this is totally preference. The same with MRAD and MOA, right? It's just what you want to use, and they both work fine. I personally use a single stage, and all my competition rifles now have been switched over to single stage if they had a two-stage in it. I tried two-stage for a little bit, I just couldn't get used to it, but this is totally preference, and just do whatever you want. What distance do you zero your rifles? Rimfire 50 yards, centerfire 100 yards. I don't deviate from that, and I don't see a reason to. Where does one go to find competition and training aids? I guess this really depends on your location. I can only speak to here in Canada, and unfortunately here in Canada there's not many options. If you want to really practice your fundamentals, so not PRS related, but strictly your fundamentals, shooting offhand, using a sling, and teaching you good habits, I would obviously suggest the Maple Seed course, which is a Canadian adapted version of the Appleseed course in the States. And it's a one-day, full-day course, but it's really good, again, to build your fundamentals and show you what to work on if you're a new shooter. But if you want something more PRS related, there's very few options. Fortunately, the CRPS released a set of events called the CRPS Rimfire Competition Academy, I believe, and that one is a really good place to start if you can find an event near you. But unfortunately, those events aren't accessible to everyone depending on where you are. You can always just go to a match, like a club level match, and just try it out with what you have already. Just make sure to tell the match instructor it's your first match, and your squad mates as well, because if they know it's your first match, they're not going to just let you go rogue on a stage, because obviously there's safety concerns there too. But people are very friendly, they're willing to help, and they'll show you the ropes when you're a new shooter. And that's how I learned. I didn't go to these sort of introductory clinics, and I don't think it's necessary. It is a really good starting point if it's available to you, but again, I don't think it's a necessity before shooting your first match. Do you use bubble levels when you're shooting? This actually comes from a comment where someone mentioned he never sees me verify a bubble level before taking a shot, but I actually do. It must be quick and not easy to see on camera, but when I close my bolt and I'm bringing my hand up to the trigger, that's actually when I'm quickly checking my rifle level, especially for shots in a rimfire match. I would say anything beyond 150 yards, I do verify my bubble quickly. Anything inwards of that, especially under 100 yards, I can generally tell when my rifle is level enough, so I don't really check it strictly for the club level matches, for instance, but for the further matches, I definitely do check it. It's just not obvious on camera. And I have a bubble level on all my competition rifles, and I've been toying with the idea of getting ascendant level just because I've seen quite a few of them now, and they're definitely intriguing, but I'm afraid they might actually be distracting to me, because with the flashing lights and stuff, I feel like it would be a bit of a distraction. Have you ever, or do you plan to send your rifle for lot testing? I know lot testing is really big for rimfire shooters in general. Unfortunately, here in Canada, lot testing is really difficult, especially if you're doing it yourself, simply because of the poor ammo availability we have to deal with. If you find a bunch of different lots of ammo and you go to test it, by the time you go back to your computer to order the lot that you want to shoot, chances are it's going to be out of stock. Our SK dealer got a huge pallet of I don't know how many hundreds of cases of SK ammo, and it was sold out within 4 or 5 hours, and we don't get frequent restocks. I think that was the first restock we had in almost 2 years, so it's a very unfortunate scenario that we had to deal with. And again, if you are able to lot test in Canada, you're very lucky. We also don't have Lapua testing centers in Canada. I believe we do have an Ely one. I can't remember where it is. It might be in Quebec. I could be totally wrong. But anyway, I believe we do have an Ely testing center, so you could send your rifle there and then potentially get ammo if they test it. I don't know if it works like the Lapua centers, but I don't have any plans to do that, to be honest. And again, we just have to buy what we can find, and hopefully it shoots well in your rifle. If a lot really doesn't shoot for you, it's easy enough to sell secondhand. But in terms of actually lot testing, like 5 or 6 different lots, I don't think we have that luxury right now. Do I see many US shooters come up to our Canadian matches? No, I've never seen, I don't think anyone out of country, to be honest. But granted, I started PRS Rimfire during the pandemic when all the borders were closed. That was a factor. I know some US shooters have come up to Canada for the Centerfire PRS matches out west, but I've never seen a US shooter come to a Rimfire match. Although now that we've been shooting a lot more rimfire matches in Pennsylvania and New York and some of the northern states, it sounds like we may have maybe given some US shooters a little bit of interest to try a Canadian match, which I think would be really awesome if some people came up and just tried it out. But currently I've never seen a US shooter come to a Canadian match, and honestly there was no reason to, because they have so many more matches to choose from down there. There's no point in having the trouble of crossing the border and all that stuff. But we put up some great matches here in Canada. The Northern Rimfire series is doing a fantastic job in the PRS, putting out some really nice matches. So if you are interested in shooting a Canadian match and you're watching this in the States, you are by all means welcome, and we'd love to have you. Do you plan to shoot more Centerfire? Yes, I plan to. I have my whole 2023 calendar laid out, and there's definitely some Centerfire events on there, but it's not my main focus. PRS Rimfire will continue to be my main focus simply because of the availability of places to practice as well as matches. Centerfire, especially here in Canada, is not as accessible because we just don't have the distances to practice or even host matches. All the Centerfire matches before were hosted on military ranges, which all closed down to civilian use during the pandemic, and very few of them have opened back up. And in terms of actual locations to actually practice and create a robust drop curve, most of our ranges max out at 200 or 300 yards. So it's really difficult for us to actually be competitive in Centerfire unless you dedicate a lot of time to traveling, and it's just not something I'm interested in. So Rimfire will remain my main focus, and I'm very happy about that. I was talking to this with some other guys, a little bit of a tangent, but Rimfire is going to remain that underdog, if you will, or it's like the ugly cousin to Centerfire. It's never going to be as prestigious, and there's never going to be as much money in terms of like prize money and stuff, which is totally fine. I can totally accept that. I think that's the way it should be. I think it's just the way it is. I think there's a lot of skill in both disciplines, but obviously Centerfire is what people think of when they think of PRS. So Rimfire is the underdog, and I'm totally fine with that, but it is what I mainly concentrate on. Hold or dial. I think it's very important to know how to do both efficiently. I like to get very comfortable with my reticles and essentially be able to use them like it's second nature. Let's say I need to hold 6.2 mils, so I don't have to count each line, 6.2 mils. I know exactly where it would be. I can naturally point it onto the reticle, put whatever wind I need to on the target, and then send the shot. So I think it is very important to know how to hold and to dial. But nowadays I dial everything I can unless the stage has restrictions where I can't, or it just makes a lot more sense to use my reticles for holdovers. But generally speaking, I do favor dialing, which is a complete departure or change from what I used to do, because the first probably 18 months I was shooting this, I would hold over basically everything and never dial. But it's just sort of how I've adapted my shooting style. I don't think there's wrong or right way, just do what works best for you, but know how to use both, because definitely in certain stages you'll have to implement both and you won't have a choice. What do you think of fast twist rimfire barrels? A lot of guys here have switched to 1 in 12 twist barrels. The sort of default before was 1 in 16 inch twist. I actually don't have a 1 in 12 twist or any faster twist than 1 in 16, so I can't really speak to my personal experiences. I will say quite a few shooters that I greatly respect have had really good success with a 1 in 12 twist barrel, so it is something that's obviously piqued my curiosity, and I probably will definitely try my own testing with a fast twist barrel in the future, but I currently still run a 1 in 16 twist, and it's been working out pretty well for me. So unfortunately, I just haven't done the testing to have an opinion on it. And also, I do want to note, most of the 1 in 12 twists everyone has been switching to has been from IBI, so International Barrels Inc., which is great. I mean, it's a great company. I have an IBI as well. But I think there's a lot of factors to consider, and it'd be interesting to see more 1 in 12 twists from other manufacturers just to see if people are getting the same results, right? Because it could be a whole different host of factors, like the type of rifling, the chamber cut, all these different things. So it's an interesting subject. I just haven't had any experience with it. At what distance does a rimfire semi start to lose against a rimfire bolt gun? So I've done some very unscientific I don't even want to call it testing, just comparisons. And what I've seen is at around the 200 yard mark, the semis really start to drop off in accuracy, especially when compared to a bolt gun. And I've talked to some other shooters who run semis quite heavily in rimfire matches, and they actually tend to agree with me. So I'm going to say around the 200 yard mark. And I'm sure there's some unicorn semi-auto rimfire out there that shoots just as accurate as a bolt gun out to distance, and that's cool. But generally speaking as well, setting up a nice accurate bolt gun, which is accurate enough for this discipline, is a lot easier and cheaper than setting up an equivalent semi-auto. And that's what I've seen time and time again. All right, last question here is, can you give us any more details about the new rifle build that's incoming? I don't want to spoil any details, but I have let it slip, obviously, that I am getting a new rifle build. It's actually just a barreled action because I already have the KRG C4 that I plan to drop it in, as well as the Razor Gen 3, which I'm already currently using. But I do want it to remain a surprise. Obviously, when it gets here, I'll do a full video introducing it onto the channel. I'm very excited to say it's actually in the mail now, but it's coming from quite far away, so I don't know how long it's going to take, and it may or may not have to cross a border. So it's very exciting. But I'm not going to give any details right now. It should be soon. Hopefully it gets here soon enough where I can do some in-depth testing before the season starts. And obviously I'll bring you guys along for that once it arrives. But I'm not going to spill any further details about it until it arrives. I'm very excited for it though. But anyway, that was it. I finally finished all these questions, and I'm going to try and cut this video so it's not too long. But I know, just given the amount of questions that came in, this is probably going to be a long video. So if you stuck to the end, I do thank you. Again, let me know if you have any further questions in the comment section. And if I do another video like this in the future, we'll see if we can do it live so you guys can interact with me at the same time, which I think would be a really neat idea. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Take care. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.